Hello, everybody, and welcome to Breaking Story with Young Screenwriters. I'm Alexie, that's Adam, and we have a special guest, Theo, with us today because we are talking about video games and video game adaptations that actually work. And the three that we chose, because we really think they work well, is The Last of Us, of course, ARCANE, which, fabulous, and Detective Pikachu. So yeah, let's get into it. Adam, before we started, you mentioned, we started this conversation about video game adaptations and why they're hard and kind of why they have a reputation for being hard.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this, and this has been attempted many, many times because Hollywood is so hungry for IP, I think. I'm just looking up like list of video game adaptations that have failed, and you could see like, wow, over 50 big franchises that were very successful, all turning into horrible or just very mediocre. Failed is a gentle word to use. Films or TV shows, right? And I think one of the issues that you have to grapple with narratively is that when somebody is playing a video game, they're in control, like their agency and choices are driving what the characters are doing. You're controlling the characters. And there's like a direct line between, what you, the player, what you, the user, is experiencing and what the character does and says. Whereas in traditional narrative, you're empathizing with the character who's making choices, but you aren't them. Right. So I think that that's kind of like the big challenge that I think most people struggle with. Curious what you both feel. If you feel like that like in Last of Us, which is probably the straighter adaptation. I've only watched the first episode, but what your experience sort of seeing like as a game player and as the viewer, what they did differently to overcome that or not.
I felt that for The Last of Us pilot, it was, from what I remember, almost shot for shot. Like it felt so much like the game that I remember saying like, wow, this is the game. It felt the same, which was really interesting because I haven't had that experience with a lot of adaptations where it had the same like emotional drive as a video game. And I think that had to do with the pacing and some of the camera angles. Like we really feel in that pilot when they're escaping that we're with them and that we're moving with them. So I think that was a credit to the writing and the direction. But I agree with you on the experience element, because in video game narrative design, the real trick is to how do you make it so that the player can decide which path you go down. And then if you're adapting, which path do you choose?
Absolutely. I remember watching, because I played The Last of Us pretty recently, and so it was pretty fresh in my mind. And I remember watching that first episode and being like, oh my God, they even have them going through tunnels. Like, because that was such a big part in the game that you'd be like crouched going through tunnels and avoiding all the lights. It's really cool. And I think that partially has to do with the fact that the narrative in the game was just so good. Like, it was just exceptionally well written, and it was already very cinematic. And also that, in the game, you were playing a character. You were not playing yourself. You were playing Joel and Ellie. And so it wasn't, you could only really have one experience emotionally playing that game because that's how you were guided. It was more like a movie where you took shooting at thing breaks in a lot of ways. I don't know. So that's kind of.
So you're thinking that possibly in that example, Last of Us succeeded better at transitioning to narrative because it was already kind of structured and organized like a traditional narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was like, it's very, very similar to the show that you see, except with the exception of a few, I think, very intelligent and awesome changes that they've made that we can get into. But it's very similar, and it's really fun to watch them. Like, I remembered playing as Joel, crouching and hiding from all the different like Fedra lights going over and trying to guide Ellie through. And then in the most recent episode, Theo, you probably remember, there's this really intense part in the game where there's a sniper shooting down at you, and you have to try to like fight your way to get to the sniper.
I remember that part in the game, but I haven't seen the newest episode yet because in in Canada on Crave, where I watch it, my app just completely crashes on Sundays. So I have to catch it at later dates, and I just haven't had a chance.
Oh, Canada. Yeah, but it's but like when you watch it, you're like, I played that, like I did that, and it's like this interesting feeling of excitement that I haven't ever felt with a different video game adaptation in quite the same way. Like where it's like,
Yeah, I agree.
oh my gosh, I remember I did that. It's super fun.
Interesting. But in that sense, there's this weird sort of overlay of yourself and Joel, right? Like Joel is still a separate character, but you were Joel.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like he's not even necessarily someone I would normally identify with very much in a lot of ways. Like we're very different people, but you got to play as him and you have this connection to him. Yeah, I know, right? He done some things. But so I'd love to talk about a few of the points where they have deviated so far, because I think that they're so interesting. Theo, what's like one of the what's your favorite deviation that they've done?
I mean, just all of episode 3. It's all I can say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what type of deviation was it, like narratively? Like, was it something that they could have only done on the show?
I think so. So in episode 3, we follow a character named Bill who is in the game, but a little bit differently. And almost the entirety of episode 3 it's not a bottle episode, but it's in a kind of separate universe where it follows Bill's journey before we get to this point, and then we kind of merge timelines at the end of the episode. And it's just this beautiful moment of following what becomes two people's journey in this strange little world, and then we see how we fall into it. But it really allows us to deepen the world building. There's a moment where they showcase, the beginning of the episode is Bill not leaving his house, and they're like, we got to evacuate Bill, blah, blah, blah. And everybody leaves, and finally he's alone, and he's like, great. Walls off the whole city, or I guess it's a town, and this becomes his life, and he's like the ultimate prepper.
Yeah.
And then a man comes in.
Oh, a man falls into his hole and has to get him out. But yeah, it's the thing so in the game, there was a lot of stuff that you could pick up and read. Like that was a major mechanic of the game, was that you were always picking up letters from people or listening to tapes, and just kind of like, if you looked, enjoying like little snippets of the world. And there was a lot about Bill and his relationship with another man named Frank that you could find in letters if you looked. So this whole thing was there. But what they were able to do in the show is really take a moment to pull it to the surface and use it kind of as a vehicle for us to understand that love can still exist in this world, because everything's doomed, right? And like everything's so ruined, and then Joel just lost Tess. And so I think that for me, it was kind of like what I think the narrative function was that Joel just lost Tess. And in a way, when you're watching apocalyptic shows, it's kind of like, how much does that matter? How much do you expect to lose people all the time? And so we took a moment to be with Bill and Frank and realize, no, they still love, they still can live a long life. You can still expect these things. And he lost it. Like, this is still completely devastating for him. I loved that.
And I think it's also a great way to showcase the emotion that Joel is feeling, because this is a character who's never going to showcase this. He's so hard and so gruff, and he's never going to show it to Ellie. So it's almost this little kind of sideways way to say, no, here's how we're going to showcase what Joel is feeling right now through these other two characters. And there's a tension and a pacing in that episode that I found really interesting, because I had all of these moments where, I'm thinking, don't you dare let that guy out of the hole. He's dangerous. Don't let him in your house. Don't feed him dinner. And then it became, well, don't fall in love.
Yeah, I was watching it with my friends who didn't know anything about it. And they said, I don't trust him. Don't let him out. Don't feed him. And then finally they were like, oh, okay. I see what's going on. But it was a really fun thing to see through their eyes as someone who doesn't know who Frank is. But I think what's so nice about that, and this kind of speaks to what you were saying, Adam, is that I really don't think that they could have done that in the game, except for in the way they did, like through letters, because it really is so much Joel and Ellie's experience. And in the show, they had the ability to spend time with someone else and to focus on that relationship, and that was really cool.
You know, you're talking about letters, and I just want to reverse to like what video game narratives can do that films can't do, right? And I'm thinking of BioShock. I don't know if you've ever played BioShock,
Oh, yes.
but part of the game is similar to that letter finding, is you're finding these recordings of the characters before the incidents, before and as society starts to crumble. You're listening to like recordings of the people who you're, you know, like the people who are dead, the people who are dying, the people who are going to kill you. Like you're getting little chunks of the story as you explore the spaces and as you find things, and you're getting like, oh, that's the backstory of that guy I just killed. You know, like you're still making choices, and you're still exploring the space, but you're piecing together little pieces of information. Whereas I think in traditional narrative, you can't. You're presenting each image in a succession linearly through time, right? That sort of joy of, oh, I discovered this little journal and I'm going to read it and find out about that other character. That's something that actually I think only video games really do well. I don't know, just sort of reminded me of that.
It's kind of like a tertiary function, right? Because you have your main narrative, and then you have side quest narratives, and then I would say in a fair majority of video games that you have the discovery option. And what's great about it is it's an option. So as a player, you can say, oh, yes, I would love to delve into this mythology or this world. But you can also say, no, I just want to experience the top line narrative, which is an interesting way and a difficult way to present a story, because how do you then make sure that you have everything that you need when someone can kind of pick and choose?
Absolutely. And you know what, that kind of reminds me of like, sometimes you have writers who come in and they have such a big world that they're in love with, that they've created, and that they want to make into a movie. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but it is worth thinking, like, maybe you want to make a game, you know, like where you can drop in all these little pieces for people to discover or not, and kind of have that bigger backstory that more streamlined X minute episodes or X minute long film can't do.
Yeah, video games are really good at exploring backstory and lore in ways that narrative doesn't really like to do as much. Like I'm just thinking of like, you know, all the big don'ts are, oh, never have never start a story with too much exposition. Be very mindful of how much you dump onto the, you know, audience. Whereas in video games, like you can get exposition, you can get that lore and that backstory through just a character exploring and navigating a world. And that's sometimes kind of its appeal in and of itself. Again, I'm thinking of other games, the way they explore narrative, the Dark Souls games, Elden Ring. There's no upfront narrative you experience. It's all you piecing together what happened and why. You could play the whole game and be like, I have no idea what the hell just happened. You know, like it doesn't present itself to you. You could be like, well, I just killed a bunch of guys and I was kind of confused where the snake monster came from and why they were talking to me. But if you spend time reading the item descriptions, talking to the characters and investigating the world, little pieces of the story will present itself to you. Little pieces of lore out of context. And whereas in narrative in film and television, you have kind of a responsibility to focus on the here and now and the character's immediate conflict and problems because of that phenomena we're talking about of like empathy, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to empathize with somebody who's just sort of walking around listening to stuff. We want to do that, right? We want to discover and piece together. But the audience, we're going to get bored senseless just without conflict, without immediate you know, drama, basically. So it's kind of like I don't know. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I was saying, like, imagine Last of Us if they left all this stuff in letters. Like, instead of actually seeing Bill and Frank, you just saw Joel picking up and reading a letter, and we had like a voiceover. You know, that's like but it works excellently in the game. Like, it's a really fun experience. And then I think that that's something that they're learning, that we're as like the entertainment industry is better learning to translate to the screen. So do you want to talk a little bit about Arcane?
Yeah, let's talk about Detective Pikachu first.
You want to Detective
because I feel
Pikachu.
like that's kind of like in the extremes of like, we have a pretty faithful adaptation in Last of Us to the source material, and Detective Pikachu is a relatively faithful, but they takes a lot of liberties with its source material. It's not based on a mainline Pokemon game, but it's like one of the first major 3D live action Pokemon movies, which is a huge media franchise. It's based on a spin-off game, which is much smaller and more I
didn't even know it existed, and I have played every single mainline Pokemon game that has ever come out.
Yeah, very
as
niche.
They come out. Yeah, and I didn't even know that the Detective Pikachu game existed. So I was surprised about that. But yeah.
I watched it one time in theaters and I was really pleasantly surprised. I had a great time with it. It was a sweet little story. It focused on a great sort of character situation in that world, right? In a world where everybody bonds with Pokemon. It's somebody who has trauma over that and doesn't want Pokemon in their life. They had a dream and they're leaving it off. They have daddy issues, and I don't know if I want to spoil what was kind of unique about it, but they meet a Pikachu who they can hear it's Ryan Reynolds talking to them, and it's not just a cute Pokemon saying its own name. It's literally Ryan Reynolds talking out of the voice of Pikachu, and they have to uncover a mystery together, right? And I actually thought that was a great adaptation choice as opposed to the mainline Pokemon games, because the mainline Pokemon games, it's all about you train, you collect badges, you win the competition. Now, I do think you could do like a good competition tournament Pokemon movie possibly, but like, I liked that they started with a mystery. I thought it was a better choice for, I don't know, something that was dramatic. I don't remember all the details of the story, but I thought it really was a smart choice to do something that was a little smaller in scale and more specific.
Yeah. So I want to tell you a little bit about an experience I had kind of pitching a video game adaptation a while ago. Have you all played Star Fox?
I have.
Back in the day. Yeah.
Back in the day, like right when I graduated college, I was just like thinking about different stuff to write. And I had the idea of like all those animals that they send into space, they always die and it's horribly sad and depressing. But like, what if they made a little space civilization instead? And then was kind of like spinning it up and thought about Star Fox. And my friends and I, we worked at Scholastic together. We started writing an adaptation and made a whole pitch book about it. And we ended up getting to pitch it to DreamWorks, and they really liked it. And then we completely hit a wall because Nintendo and their rights is like notoriously hard. So it was like everybody liked it. Everything was going great. We were like, my God, this is amazing. And then, that Nintendo.
You don't have the rights to that character.
No, I did learn my lesson though about like pitching stuff that you don't have the rights to. That sometimes it's probably okay, but not with Nintendo. Like you want to make sure that it's at least obtainable, even if you haven't. Yeah, it's like they were like, in order to do anything with Nintendo, you have to like, at least at the time, I guess this was like 2018. Something like that. So maybe it's changed in the last 5 years. Who knows? At that point, though, you had to fly out to Japan and like take tons of meetings with Nintendo for them to even think about letting you make one of their properties. So it just wasn't going to work. But yeah, that was my experience pitching a video game adaptation. They liked it.
Good experience, though.
Yeah, no, it was totally fun. It was totally worth it, and it was a really fun story. And we took kind of an approach to it that was more Arcane, like what Arcane did for League of Legends, where we gave it a prequel, like a backstory of like how these people came to be, and it was really fun.
You should write it and call it Moonwolf, and just do it anyway.
Oh yes, I will.
You know, 50
Moonwolf.
Shades, that's how E.L. James got her start.
That's right. Just change the names from Twilight, wasn't
It was Twilight.
it? Yeah. So I was
sorry,
gonna kind
you
of.
go.
I was thinking. So like Arcane, since I brought it up, have you both seen Arcane?
Yes, I loved it.
I thought it was amazing.
It's very
I'm
good.
curious. So I'm curious what you all think about that overall, and like kind of like that style of adaptation and stuff like that.
I mean, it's almost to the vast majority of the fans of Arcane, the video game does not matter in the least bit. It's like kind of a weird little detail that it's related to League of Legends. Like most people who like Arcane don't care, don't know, because it doesn't matter. It's a totally original story in a game from the world and lore of a game that no one even cares about the story at all, right? Like it's just randomly just a great story using kind of IP that was on the shelf, you know. I'm not saying that League of Legends people weren't trying to get something good going, because they did clearly, but like it's kind of like they were able to do whatever they wanted because they could do anything, you know, and it just happened to be where they picked a great story, and I almost think of it as just like it's just a traditional narrative. Like I don't even think of it as a video game adaptation.
Yeah,
because I played the game a little bit, but I there was no connection for that for me when I watched the show, because I don't even remember there being like a narrative story in the game in that function.
Yeah, I think that like as far as I can tell, the only thing that's similar is just that like you play the characters, so you kind of see how
they came about.
Yeah, how Jax got to be who she is, and all of that. Like that you kind of get to see how she became this person who does these things. But besides that, it was very, very original. Yeah.
I've been seeing a lot of big video game franchises with movies in development right now. In the chat, they were just mentioning Death Stranding is now.
I'm interested in
which I love that game.
I did not love that game.
I love that game.
I love the idea of that game. I hated playing it. You just walk. You just walk.
No, that's not totally
I'm being
fair. That's not. It is. It takes two of the mechanic. First of all, okay, Hideo Kojima, the Metal Gear. No, I can't speak English.
He's brilliant. The
guy who directed Metal Gear Solid, Kojima, he's like a video game auteur director. He's been making cinematic, groundbreaking video games for decades and decades, right? And this was his first non Metal Gear Solid / Silent Hill related project that he'd ever made, and it was a few years ago. It was a PS4 exclusive, and it's got like all these Hollywood stars in it. Norman Reedus, Guillermo del Toro plays him. Doesn't play himself, but like he's acting in it. All these big stars, but it's such a high concept. Okay, it takes two of the core mechanics that everyone kind of hates, walking, like, and making like traversal of basic, environments difficult, and item management, and it makes an entire gameplay system around you're going from point A to B. You're literally a mailman in the post-apocalyptic future, carrying stuff on your back, and it's weighting you down. And it's like you're trying to walk over the thing. Oh, can you build a ladder? Walk across the river. Wait, can you put the bag slightly to your left so your weight is good enough to walk across? Like it's
what
so,
the heck?
You would hate it. You would hate it.
Oh, and also there's
a
whole thing about you can urinate in the game, and your urination is actually a gameplay mechanic. You have this weird little baby that's tied to you all the time. That's kind of like that keeps these alien creatures from like coming out from another dimension and eating you up.
And it cries through the microphone.
Oh, you have to rock it to sleep, and it's connected to your urine. It's a crazy game. But
what is this?
I loved it.
Are you pranking me?
I love the idea of it.
I loved it. And the music is fucking amazing. It's such a, I loved it. I had such a
The
great time.
story was so cool. I was bad at it because you're basically, you have like a ladder on your back.
How far did you get? Did you get past the first like area?
Yeah, I got to a few different places, and then
Okay.
I got to a point. I was like halfway through. You know what? I think I looked it up, and I was like, "Where am I at in the game?" And I think I was about 35%, and I was like, "There's no way I can continue to do this," because I had just spent no word of a lie, 1 hour walking from one place to another in real time with this ladder on my back with like 18 things on it, and you wobble. And then as you wobble, and then you drop everything, and then you got to pick it all back up, and you got to put it all back, and then and then you got to walk so slow so you don't drop the ladder of stuff. And I was like, I wanted to experience the story so badly, but I couldn't do it anymore.
That sounds
I
fun.
love the story. I love how there's so much that's like you could label as pretentious, but he takes such big swings.
He's so good.
It's so shameless. It's so, the names of his characters are just so on the nose, but in a way that's like, it's so delightful. I will stand by that Metal Gear Solid 5, the Phantom Pain, is one of the most cinematic game openings of all time. Like, your character wakes up out of a coma and you can barely move, and someone's trying to assassinate you. And it's this incredible hospital escape sequence that like that should be a movie, you know.
They should do a Metal Gear movie.
They should do a Metal Gear Solid movie. I mean,
they should do a show.
The reason why we're talking about this is like they're making a movie of Death Stranding, and I'm like, this guy is just a frustrated movie director who's been making video games for decades. Yes, I want to see him direct a movie.
That sounds like it'd be like, I'd be interested. It's an interesting idea. As someone who was scarred by Super Monkey Ball and like the like whole like trying to like balance and roll around thing, I don't think that's for me. But
you should. It's on the Game Pass. You should try Death Stranding.
Try it,
because it's on. You'll just be, if you play it for an hour, you'll be like, wow, the mood is so interesting. What an interesting world. Oh, this science fiction world building is fascinating. And then you get to a point where you'll be like, who made this?
Or like, you know what? I think that if the roads were not as long, like if it didn't take me 1 hour to walk.
Do you know the gameplay mechanic that hooked me into it was that the sense of like you're actually, every time you go on a path, it becomes easier. Like you're actually building, the whole thing is you're building connections across an America that's separated, right? Like every time you make a delivery, that outpost becomes more like closer to the grid, more connected, right? And sort of the satisfaction of slowly building out the network of America and like seeing these like letters go back and forth and relationships be formed. Like I got a lot of pleasure out of that. And also I was in
honestly
pandemic, so I was into it.
I was not.
It sounds,
I got it when it first came out.
It's good.
It kind of, based on what you're describing, it kind of reminds me of Firewatch. Have you all played that one?
Oh yeah, there are some similarities, I would say.
I think I have it on in my games, but I don't think I've played it yet.
So it's basically that you're in like the Wyoming wilderness in the 1980s, 1990s-ish, and you're, I guess, kind of like a ranger, like a park ranger, whose job it is to look out for fires. You're on fire watch, and you're just kind of like existing in the woods and like wandering around and stuff for a while until you start trying to figure out some things that are going on. And that one is a very cinematic one that's just like, this is so interesting. This is so like somebody really invested in understanding being a Firewatch person in the 90s or in the 80s. And so maybe check that one out. But it was yeah.
Ed, that has a great story. I really enjoyed that.
What's a game that you all wish someone would adapt? Because
I would love to see Outer Wilds be a movie. If you played that, it's the one about the time loop. You have 30 minutes. I think it's called Outer Wilds.
I know the game.
How would you adapt it? Like what approach would you use?
Groundhog Day. It's a Groundhog Day mystery, right? You're trying to like it's like the solar system is exploding every 30 minutes. And you have to go from like, you have to navigate and like put the pieces together before, and you're learning as the time loop keeps collapsing on itself, slowly how to beat it, because you can beat the whole game in 30 minutes. It's just because you have to beat it in one go. But the thing is, you're iteratively learning. I think that would be an interesting Groundhog
That's really
Day kind
cool.
of story.
That's really cool.
What
So
about you?
you would adapt it in what way? Like which style? Pikachu, Last of Us, or Arcane?
I think Pikachu. You need to take liberties and like make characters.
Makes sense.
I had this idea when I was playing Cyberpunk when it first came out, and I was an outlier with Cyberpunk because I had 0 glitches with that game when it came out.
But you played on PS5.
I had a PS5.
Okay.
So it was this beautiful experience for me. But I thought, wow, this would be such a cool show if when the show starts, there's actually 3 versions of the main, like there's 3 versions of V, because when you start the game, you can be any kind of gender mix that you want to be, because you can switch up voices and parts and whatnot. But then you also can choose from these 3 like starting lifestyles. So you can be a nomad, or like a corpo rat, or like a street punk kid. But like what I think it would be so cool if there was a show where all 3 of them existed at the same time in each of those iterations. And then as the story progresses, you discover why, and then they kind of clash together, and there's 3 different versions of this character.
That's really neat. That's really cool. I would really I'd enjoy that. We just watched the Netflix animated show Cyberpunk, and my understanding is that it's not like it like takes place in the same world, but I think
it's in the world,
yeah, but it's
not a straight adaptation of the story in the game. It's just but
it's
also
more arcane.
Cyberpunk
right?
is based on an original IP of
it is.
It's a tabletop game from the late 80s, early 90s.
I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. But yeah, the animated show was pretty fun. We watched the whole thing pretty fast, but I didn't see it. I played the game very briefly, and I didn't see,
because you didn't get to Johnny Silverhand yet.
No,
in the game. See, that was what hit me in the game, because I didn't know. I try to go into everything I do blind, and I went into that game completely blind. And then at some point, I was like, "Why am I Keanu Reeves?" And then I realized, oh, good, And I thought that was such a clever thing that they did in the story, where you have another character inside your character's head, but that character is played by Keanu Reeves. I thought that was brilliant. I love that game. I thought it was fun.
I felt like it would have been an amazing game for me if I could play it in third person, because my brain cannot handle first person. I gave
it's very immersive.
Yeah, I gave it a fair shake. I can't do it.
Another first person game that's classic that's in development for a movie. Netflix is making a movie of it. BioShock. And I don't think you could make BioShock in third person, because it's all about subjectivity. It's all about not really knowing who you are, seeing yourself in the mirror, like the hands being all you see is so much part of it. I wonder how they're going to adapt that.
It's going to be interesting. I wonder if they'll use anything from Infinity and that whole world.
I wonder. I hope so. I think that
I liked that. I liked Infinity.
I loved it. And I loved Infinite. I loved all 3 of them. I would love more BioShock games in general. I know. So to answer Spencer's question, it's not Gore Verbinski. It's somebody. What's her last name? Lawrence is directing it. But one of the issues with BioShock is that it's so gory. Like there's this whole thing about the little sisters and the needles girls. Injections. Like you can't do it without that in some capacity.
Yeah.
But like, how can you make a movie that's not R-rated?
I think you just have to embrace that it's R, right?
Exactly.
Like kind of like Last of Us. Last of Us said F it, right? Like,
right. But Last of Us was always kind of R-rated. I don't know.
I don't think you can make that show without that rating, because
it's HBO.
The creatures, it's an HBO show, and the creatures, like, there needs to be a certain amount of gore in that story. But a great thing about that story, I had this discussion with someone else who was kind of like concerned about the zombie aspect, and I was like, well, I don't really think it's a zombie show. Like, I was like, there's an element of that in it, but I think that the core story is really about Joel and Ellie. Like, it's a relationship between two people, And that's why I think, you know, that core element is so strong, and that's what makes both versions of the story strong.
Yeah, that relationship is definitely so central to it. And sometimes it's like you almost like it's clear that there's like a monster threat, but you almost forget that it's like a monster world. The most recent episode has a very intentional reminder that you're in a monster world. I won't ruin it since that one's so new, but
I've only watched one episode,
check.
So I do need to do my homework. And
I can't wait for you to watch episode 3. I am so excited to hear what you have to think, because that was
Carl,
just a
I know
pleasure.
I'm gonna love it. I know I'm gonna love it.
Everyone cries. Everyone cries. I didn't cry because I don't ever cry.
I didn't cry.
I need to cry.
I thought about it though. I did.
Carl got teary. I got like, I was like, oh no, I really don't want to cry. But that was like that was as close as I got. So the video, because I want to answer my own question really, really bad, because I really want to talk about it. The game that I really want to see made into a show, Last of Us style, is Horizon. Have you all
but
played
only
Horizon?
Season 1. Only Season 1. Not season 1. The first game.
Yeah, I thought that was super fun, and I think that you
one of my favorites of all time.
You love Horizon?
It's one of my favorite games of literally all time.
Really?
Because there is something about that game that, I mean, you know, you start this game and you're this kind of girl and all of the stuff's happening, and then there's robot dinosaurs, and I really love bow and arrow mechanics. Like that's a really big plus for me game wise. But in terms of the story, I'm like, here's this chick. She's, you know, great. She's badass, and we're fighting, you know, robot frickin' T-Rexes in the plains of Colorado. I don't even know. So it had everything that I love in a game except for trashy romance. If it had trashy romance, it would have been 10 out of 10.
I feel like there is so much tension between her and a few random side characters, and I just like really need them to push that. I like really need to know.
I don't know. I think a lot of American games are like afraid to do romance well.
Yeah.
I've noticed it in like the Dragon Age games, and even in the Assassin's Creed games are the perfect representation of like what mainstream they're French, I know, USOF, but like what like American like big open world RPGs kind of end up being in the like middle ground, right? They take sort of, oh, this is this popular mechanic, let's put it in, let's put this popular mechanic, put it in. Like the Assassin's Creed games always feel like they're, or at least the last few feel just like that.
Everything.
And like, oh yeah, we'll put romance in, but it's kind of like a side character that doesn't really factor into the main story at all, right? Like I feel like
sneak behind the bushes.
Exactly, right. Whereas The Witcher 3 was like, no, this is part of the story. This matters, you know.
That was a hard choice for me. I had some hard choices in The Witcher.
The first time I played, Geralt was alone. Because he tried to have sex with everybody.
Oh, because
I tried to get away with it. It was like, oh no.
No, I chose Yen. It's the way to go.
Best.
She is the best.
Especially if you read the books.
Also, she keeps calling. She keeps calling what's her name? Ciri, little sister. And I'm like, how are you gonna date her dad and be her sister? I can't do that. You've ruined it for me. Triss. But Yen was great.
Also, Triss is kind of like
creepy.
Very creepy. If so, in the books, she like is very different. And like, sorry, I'm just gonna do a side note. There's this whole thing about how she has like constant diarrhea and stomach problems. And like, it's really funny in the book, but it's like, why is this happening? Why? And like, Geralt is so unattracted to her. Like the first time he meets her, it's like, oh, there's the girl who's shitting constantly. She's got like this problem, and you're like,
it's for the contrast.
Why didn't that make it into the games? You know,
it's like they have to make her not attractive to him immediately, so they're not like, oh, this girl's hot. Why doesn't Geralt want to be with her, even though she's obsessed with him? And it's like, oh, you know, rampant diarrhea. That's the answer.
That was a great solution, honestly. I want more books to do that. The show sort of made a slight reference to it, but they didn't go all the way in.
I feel like I'm curious about The Witcher show.
The Witcher is a book adaptation, not a game adaptation.
And honestly, ready for me to say something controversial, but speak my truth? I think they should have just done the game adaptation. I think that they've kind of played this weird middle ground with it, and it doesn't work because they're not committing to the book. And most people who are coming into this world are familiar with the game and like looking for those iconic, the two swords, things like, you know. I think they should have just done the game adaptation is like, at first I was thrilled that they were going to do the book, but the fact that they keep kind of like wavering anyway, it's like, why'd you make that choice if you're not going to stick to your guns?
I mean, I don't know how real this drama is, but apparently there was one of the many reasons Henry Cavill left was that deviation of the source material. And also he tried to go behind the showrunner to the producers in like a power play, apparently.
Oh, really?
Like, oh yeah. No. Like stuff that he really shouldn't have done, you know, but also apparently one of the writers of the show who left was talking about how like 70% of the writers' room actively disliked the games.
Oh yeah.
And the books. And
like
we're making fun of it. And he was like, it's kind of messed up to be on a show and to like mock the source material, like not like it.
That's wild. I could get not liking I can't understand not liking that game because the game's fabulous. But if you're adapting the books, I could see it being okay that you don't like the game as long as you love the books. I feel like that's gotta be there. Like how, like, I feel like that's a thing that I love seeing with The Last of Us. You get to see the inside the episodes afterwards, and they have the writer of the video game present, and also they have Craig Mazin there, and you can just tell how much they really kind of like treasure this thing that the game was, and they want to just expand on this world and kind of draw it out and tell it in a new way, and they love it. And I think that that's part of what makes it so good. And then also it's like, I shared something in the email announcing this topic where it's this conversation that one of the showrunners, Christian, I think is his first name, I can't remember his last name, a conversation that he had on Reddit where somebody was asking for the scripts for Arcane a year ago or so, and he wasn't able to share them yet. But he went into this whole thing where he was sharing like his approach, like their approach to the storytelling, and there's just so much passion, and like they don't have as much source material to draw from, but like you can just tell that there's like a lot of respect there for what they're doing, and it's just,
I think it's necessary.
How are you going to adapt something that you don't love? Like
it's money. It's a job.
I guess, yeah, that's why.
it's a writing job, and people, you know.
But like,
I don't know. I also don't know how true that is. It's just a writer from the show said that, and the power play stuff with Henry Cavill and the showrunner, not good.
It just sounds.
But I also understand being upset
drama.
with, like, if you really care about the source material, and then the show is, like you said, doing this middle ground where they're not really. Like, I remember season 2, they like invented a whole new antagonist character and like just changed whole plot lines for like not necessarily better. It was just kind of different. And I was like, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the books, but
I think that so many people didn't get the first season because it was subtle and it was layered, which was something I enjoyed.
I love the first season.
I don't think that like mainstream audiences all got it, and so they thought, oh, let's do something different in season 2 so we can keep people on. And I think that they just kind of muddied the waters. But I think it would be interesting to see an adaptation of The Witcher 3 specifically. I think that would be a really interesting journey.
I'm conflicted though. I'm conflicted because
the game's there.
So what's interesting to me about the games is that they're a sequel to the books.
Yeah.
Right. You can't actually adapt them without doing the books first.
Well, you could blend.
You could like the whole thing about, but because Geralt, spoiler, Geralt dies ultimately at the end of the books. He gets pitchforked by a kid, and dies, and then Ciri takes him and Yennefer to Avalon because they both died. And it's kind of a weird metaphor thing. But in the games, it's like he recovers from that, but he has amnesia. He lost his memory. So the first 2 games are Geralt being manipulated by all the people in his life because he doesn't remember them or really the why of anything. And then The Witcher 3 is when he finally got all his memories back.
Like there's a way to play that where you blend things in, and you have episodes that are memories and episodes that are reality, and intentional misdirections in episodes that, you know, only people who know the source material are going to get, which I think is a really fun little gambit in an adaptation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's like an inside joke.
That was like in the most recent episode of Last of Us, they finally had like the comics that in the game, the space, not like Space Invaders, I can't remember what it is, but there's the comics that Ellie collects in the game, and we finally saw her find a comic and saw like a little scrap on the wall that was a drawing of this man named Ish, where in the game you read this whole story about Ish. If you chose to, you read all these things about like this whole underground society, and that was the only nod to Ish that you really got, was like this one drawing on the wall that said Ish, and you were like, oh my gosh, and it makes you feel very excited, but it doesn't, you don't lose anything if you don't know, and I think that's kind of the smart place to be. I love it. I hope they do a Horizon adaptation. We should write it.
We should write it. I think it would
don't write it until you have the rights, which you're not going to get.
We will never get the rights to.
Don't do
Horizon
this again, Alexie. Just take the idea, do robot dinosaurs without Horizons, new characters. Don't do it again.
I think
I'm going to do it again. I'm doing it again.
Don't do it again. Don't do it.
I started writing a novel adaptation at one point, actually, and then I was like, oh, okay, this is too much. This is too much time and energy.
Adapt public domain. That's what you
should.
I mean, I've done.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But like, don't put yourself in the situation, Alexie, again. You know what I've been really into recently? Short stories.
What? Those are good.
Oh, so many good short stories. And like, just to get ideas for like, you could take like this kernel of that and put it into your own thing. It's great. Sorry,
did you ever read the original short story for Arrival?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
I love that. Oh,
I thought it was so
beautiful.
It was so wonderful.
So I think that unfortunately we are at time for today, but thank you so much for joining us to talk about video game adaptations and video game stories and all of that. And thank you, Theo, for joining us. This was really great to have you. Next time, we are talking about 3 simple strategies for natural dialogue in your screenplay. So we're talking about some different tools you can use, kind of different tests you can use to make sure the dialogue's working, how you get dialogue that sounds really good, really natural, memorable. So that's what's up next week. We will see you then.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.